let's move on to the next block here, because former President Trump making some interesting comments about the electric vehicle transition and the push from the Biden administration, including largely provisions contained in the Inflation Reduction Act. Let's take a listen in part to what Trump had to say, and we'll react on the other side.
What's happening to our auto workers is an absolute disgrace and an outrage beyond belief. Auto workers are getting totally ripped off by crooked Joe Biden and also their horrendous leadership, because these people are allowing our country to do these electric vehicles that very few people want. And it's a mandate. So you'll ultimately be forced to drive in a car that goes for an hour and then you have to have it recharged. I hope you don't want to go very far away. Biden has imposed the outlandish requirement that 67% of all new vehicles must be electric in less than 10 years. That means Michigan and places that make cars, you can forget about it. You better get your union working, because you can forget about it. Those cars are all going to be made in China. And your bosses are leading you right down the tubes. You shouldn't pay your fees. They get these big fees from all of their workers. And it doesn't matter how bad they are, they'll endorse a Democrat, even though the Democrat's selling you down the tubes. Both the UAW bosses and the big three auto executives should be screaming at the top of their lungs. They should be ashamed of themselves. And I'm telling you, you shouldn't pay those dues. You should not pay your dues, because they're selling you to hell. You're going to be going to hell. You're not going to have any jobs. All those cars are going to be made in China. Listen to these union guys that get paid a lot of money and they get wined and dined in Washington. They know that electric cars are no good in terms of our workers.
So there is a lot to sort through there.
There's a lot going on.
Many layers. First of all, that anti-union rhetoric is so like classic standard Republican. I mean, it's delivered with like a Trumpian flourish, but the bottom line is like, you know, the big union bosses are out to get you, et cetera, et cetera. And he's talking specifically about the United Auto Workers here, where they just elected Shawn Fain, who is, you know, really standing up for the rank and file, really pushing the big three automakers. They are imminently threatening a strike. I'm talking more about this in my monologue again today. You know, is demanding 46% salary increases, is demanding that when they close a plant in the town, that there's actually, you know, a job program to keep people employed. That put this up on the screen. The part about them not pressing Biden is also just a lie. The UAW has not endorsed Biden, specifically because they don't feel he went far enough in terms of guaranteeing that the EV transition is a just transition, meaning that the wages are commensurate with what is in the industry right now and that those jobs remain union jobs. But on the other half of this, put the next piece up on the screen from the American Prospect, who did some great reporting here. You know, it's not that Biden has done nothing, which is what Trump did in terms of trying to make sure that these are union jobs and they're good, well-paying jobs, et cetera. He used all these typical neoliberal like carrots and sticks and subsidies and incentives to try to get the automakers to use union labor and keep wages high, but they didn't mandate it. Yes. And so that's the beef with the UAW, is they don't feel Biden did enough, even though it wouldn't be accurate to say that he did absolutely nothing. And then the last thing, and then I'll throw it to you, Saagar, for your reaction. Let's remember Trump's record with regard to automakers and union auto jobs. Lordstown auto plant was, you know, sort of storied, historic, really the bedrock of that community, and it's an area that I know well. Trump came in, he told these GM workers that he was going to save their plant, and of course, it was a lie. It closed. It's now there's some like battery factory nearby. They tried to get an EV maker, and none of it has worked out. And so Trump's own record with regard to the auto industry was calamitous and catastrophic, and he had zero incentives in place to keep the the jobs well-paying and union, et cetera. But he goes out there and, of course, you know, does his Trumpian thing.
I think there's some interesting parts of this.
Yes.
One is, I don't think Trump is correct about the demand for electric vehicles. So, for example, Tesla is outselling Toyota in the state of California for 2023. That's not just because of subsidies, it's because people want the cars. Also, people do drive a lot in California. There's a reason for that, which is that they're great cars. They're fun to drive.
Yeah.
Now, let's put that aside, and let's talk about some of where I kind of agree with Trump. Not on the union front, because I think what he's getting, I mean, factually is just not correct, especially whenever it comes to Shawn Fain. He's not wrong, though, that a lot of auto worker actual members did vote vote for Trump. And I think some of it stems back to those 2016 rhetoric, culture that goes into it. There's a whole other conversation we can have. Specifically on the EVs, and I've done so many monologues about this, what he has gotten at is, like you said, they have gone to this mandate about X amount of vehicles on the road that have to be electric without planning or doing any of the stuff that you actually have to do in order to achieve that very lofty goal.
But there's no mandate.
So he's talking about the EPA emissions mandate around, well, whatever.
There's no mandate.
New cars sold by 2035.
The thing that he said about like there's a mandate that it has to be 67%. That's not true.
Well,
Biden is using these incentives. That's his goal, is to get to that point. But that's just not accurate that it's like we will have this number by that year.
It's not all cars. It's that new cars have to meet X emissions. I mean, it's the same way California's doing it. They're just doing the same thing with the EPA, with their own state environmental agency requirement around new cars being sold. Regardless, the point is that if you do want to get to that, you need a massive explosion in charging infrastructure. You need a massive explosion in industrial capacity to build battery plants. He's not wrong. The vast majority, I've done tons of monologues on this, the vast majority of the battery supply chain is in China. It's a huge problem for Elon Musk and for Tesla, where not only the major battery supplier, but huge parts of their own supply chain for the basic requirements of the car themselves are not made here in the United States. So we need actual plants in order to get that done. I support the UAW trying to push that. I do not, though, and I'm not a fan of the requirement, or at the very least the EPA emission standards that require this, because I think that electric vehicles can be subsidized and can be created to be a genuine competitor, but I don't like the idea of forcing people to buy electric cars.
But I don't think anybody is not being forced to buy
But if you're in
an
environment where you're directly making it so that, well, with the emission standards, that you need to be able to have a situation where, look, there's a lot of scenarios where people are going to need a gas-powered vehicle and or want or prefer a gas-powered vehicle. Not only strategically, as he's talking about with our own oil reserves, but, you know, for rural life and for people who drive like hundreds of miles, like it's really not feasible with the current infrastructure, not to mention the amount of power that we're going to need, actual nuclear power, much cleaner and better power available. This would require, I mean, a massive change in the way that Americans live their lives in the next decade. And that's just not going to happen with the current incentives that we have here.
Right, so there's two sides of what Biden is doing.
Yeah.
On the consumer side, there are rebates in place to try to make electric vehicles more affordable,
that's
to make it more appealing for consumers. They're not being forced, but to try to bring the cost down so that electric vehicles are more appealing. On the automaker side, there's a bunch of incentives in place for them to shift to EVs. By the way, and we talked about this before with regard to California, the big three automakers already, before Biden passed the Inflation Reduction Act or any of that, they already saw the future as EVs, and they were already moving in this direction. So the Inflation Reduction Act provides additional tax. I mean, this is industrial policy, right?
Yes.
They've decided this is an important play for the future. By the way, China is all in on this market. I mean, they have aggressively been funding their own EV market because they see it also as the future, and they want to get a jump. And they've, you know, done way more than we have in terms of both the EV technology and the battery technology specifically. So we are behind. So the other thing the Inflation Reduction Act does is provides incentives for the automakers in this direction, and includes incentives to try to make those jobs good, well-paying union jobs. Now, I personally think they should have gone further in terms of requiring them to be union jobs. So, you know, all the Tesla people would have been very upset about that, because Tesla is not union. Tesla's not union.
With their current infrastructure.
So it would have been a big issue for them, even though, again, I agree with Sean Fain that they should have done that. So I just think what he's trying to do here is he's trying to make electric vehicles like a partisan issue.
And I don't want that to happen.
And I don't want it either. And the way that most consumers view this is not through a partisan valence. They're just looking at, like, what's the cost of gas? How much does an EV cost? What's the charging infrastructure? And by the way, look, so the charging infrastructure needs to be way better than it is now. There is some money for that within the Inflation Reduction Act. It's probably not sufficient. That is an important component. It's probably the most important component of making this realistic for ordinary people. But most people are just like looking at the math and seeing if this works out for them. And it's really not a partisan thing. And the one thing I will credit Elon Musk for, who I'm not a big fan, is that he has, by reading as right-wing, he has made EVs more acceptable for Republicans, conservatives, independents than back when it was seen in sort of like the Prius lens.
There's two geniuses of Tesla. Tesla was a decade ahead of establishing the actual electric vehicle at the very basic consumer level. They brought the Model 3 online and made it one of the best-selling cars currently in the United States. That's number one. Number two is the charging infrastructure. They have over 12,000 Tesla chargers that are all across the nation, which vastly outstrips every single other nation. In fact, I believe that the future value of Tesla will not be the car. It will be effectively Tesla as a physical platform. Think of it almost like a tech platform, where they're retrofitting and have created deals with Ford and with multiple other
And they just
companies.
did a deal with Ford on charging infrastructure.
So they are going to create a way for Ford vehicles and all these other electric vehicles to be able to use the existing Tesla infrastructure. I believe that's the biggest leap forward in electric technology and infrastructure has been by Tesla. The thing is, though, and this is where this has nothing to do with Elon or any of that, somebody's got to pay for the power. I mean, right now, when you charge up a car, it's actually not that much money. But if we're going to move to a place where 2/3 of vehicles are using that, not gas stations, and you're going to have to retrofit all this existing infrastructure, we are going to need a ton more power, actual, physical electricity. And that is where things get really complicated and where I have not yet seen a single real serious effort, by the Biden administration or any of that. They are going all in on solar and on wind. Their Nuclear Regulatory Commission is not doing any serious effort. And it's not just them. I mean, there's a Congress that's involved here too. So I don't disagree with you. I mean, I think it's a bad place. I would hope that electric vehicle does not become partisan because I think they're awesome cars. I do think that they very much can be the future, but there's a lot of stuff that has to line up behind it. The current status quo is really not one where we want to end up. I mean, currently, gas-powered vehicles, brand new gas-powered vehicles are still quite expensive. They're like $45,000.
Yeah,
I believe is the average price. On top of that, you got $4 a gallon right now. As I said, though, I think that gas-powered vehicles will always have a place in American life, largely because of people who live in more rural communities, because of the ability for us actually to take it out of our ground, not have to rely on foreign countries if we want to, in order to achieve that. That said, if you want to create a real mix, the current path forward isn't a terrible one, where a lot of people are just buying Teslas because they're cool cars, or Ford electric, Ford Mustangs, or any of those. And that's kind of where you want to keep it. You want to keep it at the consumer level where people are choosing them. I think it's like 10% or so or whatever of the market right now, because it's either a second car, it's largely like a upper middle class thing right now. But as the Model 3, especially right now, Tesla is massively cutting its prices. I'm very interested to see what the uptake is on there. I mean, when you can buy a brand new Tesla for like $33,000 or something, or even a used one for $25,000 with not that much mileage on it, that changes the whole game.
Yeah.
For how this is going to look.
That's true. I mean, I have a Ford EV. I love it. It gets more than 300 miles range. It's been I would not, at this point, given the charging infrastructure, I would not want that to be my only car.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Just for, if we long road trips with the kids, like that's a pain in the ass. Right. And so those are the sorts of like pragmatic considerations that a lot of people are making. It's like weighing the costs, what's gas, what's the charging infrastructure look like, what am I going to use this for, et cetera. And I charge at my house.
Right.
So for me, it's very easy. I almost never charge at any of the chargers, whatever. I just don't go further than what I can go.
Look at Burning Man. I mean, one thing is like you don't want to be 100% reliant on you're like, oh, I'm just going to drive to this Tesla charging station out in the middle of the desert.
Yeah, and you're like,
hope it works out.
It's not working.
95% of the time it will, but 5% of the time, and you got no cell service, what the hell are you going to do now?
Right, yeah.
Sure, you can do it with gas too. I'm just saying.
Those are the practical barriers.
Like,
on the political front, let me say, I think Trump is, he also often has good instincts, even when I hate what he's saying, which part of, most of what he said, I hate what he said. But I think on the anti-union part, I think he's really off base. If we just look at the numbers in terms of how the public feels about unions, if you look at the fact that the UAW is just about to have this giant fight with the automakers, so to be like the bosses, the union bosses are selling you out, I just don't think that comports with reality, public sentiment in America broadly, or even within the Republican base at this point. So that's one thing. I think he probably is right in sensing that there is an increasing partisan valence to EVs, and that there is obviously a lot of skepticism within the Republican base about doing anything with regard to climate change. And so I think, on the politics of it, on that piece, I suspect he's probably kind of prescient here. And, I hate that that's the case, but I think it's probably true.
I think that the F-150 in particular was such a massive mistake here because they tried to overpromise to their core consumer. A lot of Republicans drive Ford F-150s and in rural areas, and they were like, no, this is going to be able to totally replace it. And the thing, whenever you got real cargo, has got like a 100-mile range. I think that EV proponents, which I am, really need to be realistic about use case, about infrastructure, about the pain points, about all of that, and then can't be just telling folks who are actual farmers, yeah, you can totally replace your Ford F-150.
Yeah.
If you drive a truck for fun, go for it. It's probably a hell of a lot of fun if it's your second car or something like that. But that's not the privilege, that most people have. And it's not even the primary reason that people are buying trucks, or at least the use case there for what they exist. I just think that people need to stay within the realm of reality here and not overpromise and then underdeliver. They have to actually overdeliver, which is what a lot of Tesla cars have been able to do for their consumers. Part of the reason why they have such a high amount of brand recognition, amount of people who desire the car, is because it's not just that they want it, they have people who have it, they know people who love it, and all of that. And it has never really underdelivered in terms of what they've promised, whenever it at least comes to range and all of that. I know there's some lawsuits, but that's mostly from years ago. The brand new cars, they pretty much have not seen any of those same problems.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think it was an interesting discussion.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.